I'm gonna climb a tree.
Watch out.
Ah!
Hi there, welcome to another episode of the Board Game Business Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Noon. I'm here as always with Brian Hink and Jeremy Commander. This week we're going to, again, look at the top 10 things that a new designer usually does wrong. This time we're going to be looking at it from the designer perspective with Jeremy. Jeremy's also made a top 10, and he'd like to start with number 1.
Number 1 is only working on one game.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've talked about this before. You've said that the second game that you work on, or even the third, can shed light on that first game. If you're having a problem, you can thinking about a different problem can sometimes jog something in the first problem.
Absolutely. I think if you work on only one game, you get this tunnel vision, and it's your baby, and you're so emotionally involved in it that it's harder to make the changes or the cuts you need to make. And it's like, oh no, I can do that. And it's harder for you to learn and grow. You learn and grow. Let's think if you went to college and you had one class. Or, some people have done this in college. I'm going to take all my math classes in one semester, all my engineering classes. If you're only doing one subject, then your growth as an individual or your breadth is very limited and constrained. As soon as you're working on, and I'm not saying like give them equal time, but as soon as you're working on a second game idea or a third idea and you get it in front of other humans and you test it and you see how they react to it and you compare that to your other game, you level up as a game designer. You get better as a game designer from having more than one idea you're working on and more than one construct you're thinking about. And I think that's really the number one mistake is, I just have this one game. I've been working on this one game for 2 years and I just keep iterating on this one game and I'm kind of stuck and I'm in a rut. And if you work on more than one game, it's a lot easier to hop out of those ruts than if you're only doing one thing.
I completely agree. I hear this all the time too. And I usually tell them to put this one away for now. Mm-hmm. And you can always come back to it. Yep. Work on another one after that. And you can come back to this. Even though I know they're not going to come back to that because that game isn't the game they should be making. It's not a publishable game, and it would take so much work that I know they're going to learn so much from their next couple games that they're just going to forget about that one. They're like, oh yeah, I remember the game that I made that was so bad. So that's what I think too. I completely agree. I think that's a great one.
And this works in so many other industries as well. There's a story about Robert Rodriguez when he was first doing before he made Desperado. He was going to make 3 movies, so it was going to be a trilogy, and he ended up making the third movie. Eventually was Once Upon a Time in Mexico. But the little-known first movie is called El Mariachi, and that was supposed to be part 1, then Desperado was supposed to be part 2, and then by that point, he would have had the bad ones out of the way, and he would have had his masterpiece happen on the third one. And it just happened a little earlier, but the idea was he would learn in writing class, you write 3 scripts because the first 2 are going to suck. Just get them out of your system and and then throw them in the trash. You'll never use them. And he thought that was a waste, so he thought, well, you know what? I'll film the first 2 anyway, and then the third one will be the big one.
Right.
But the logic there is actually pretty sound. Have you designed any games before? Good Cop, Bad Cop?
A ton. A ton.
Okay. What's number 2 for you then?
Number 2. Buying art. This is a classic one. Like, my game, it's testing pretty well. I love this. And so I started, commissioning artwork. And so I went up to an event here in the Bay Area in the East Bay with a bunch of prototype games and game designers, and met some guys that they hadn't sold anything yet. They weren't on Kickstarter yet. They weren't even close to getting there yet, and they'd already spent like $2,000 on art. And I was like, oof. Because then if your game doesn't go anywhere, that's $2,000 down the tubes. It doesn't. You're not going to get anything out of it. Yeah. And so I see a lot of designers who start paying for art too early or pay for too much art. And instead of just doing something that's super minimal. And we've talked about it in the store, talked about it in the show before about resources for art or clip art or stand-in stuff. And I want to mention a couple of them real quick. The Noun Project.com, GameIcons.net, NGA.gov, that's a National Gallery of Art, OpenClipArt.org, OldBookIllustrations.com, The New York Public Library has just recently digitized their collection and made a searchable database for all the artwork and all their books, a massive collection of stuff. You can find tons of stuff there if you're doing a historical game. Great place to start.
NASA does the same thing. They make
NASA, great source. Yep, all the space images you want. Photos-public-domain.com. And then there's an article I'll put in the show notes from Digital Impact UK about the ultimate list of free stock photos. So there are a lot of places you can go and get stand-in artwork to make your game good enough. And I see too many designers, they invest a lot in artwork and then the game never gets there. Or I'll give you another example for Boost Barons. I bought some artwork for Boost Barons. For the spy theme, because originally it had a spy theme, and Brian's like, I don't really want to do a spy game. I want to change the theme of the game.
Talked about this before. You bring it to a publisher, and they're like, nah, take off the theme. Let's figure out something else. What do you got for number 3?
Number 3, making games that are hard to sell.
I'm gonna guess one of the things that you're gonna mention. It's adult themes.
No. So that's adult themes have a limited market. If your game is full of, it's another Cards Against Humanity clone. We talked about a little bit of Brian's list that to turn off. I was going to talk a little bit more about. Brian talked about too many components in your game, and that
brings up the MSRP.
Yeah, brings up the MSRP, the shipping cost. That's a big turnoff for a lot of publishers, or it's too hard to get it off a Kickstarter that way. 2, we talked about gameplay length. If your game is 2 hours long to play, you're going to appeal to a very small segment of the market instead of a broader, more casual market that wants a shorter game. And then TCGs. I don't know why I still see so many TCGs when I go to prototype events. I went to another one not too long ago, and these guys, they had we got our TCG, we're going to launch a trading card game, and we're buying this artwork to put in it. And I'm like, so you're going to launch a TCG to compete with Wizards of the Coast and like Hasbro that has tons of, and Pokemon and Nintendo that has tons of marketing money and an established market. That's really a huge David versus Goliath battle right there.
Artists on staff.
Artists on staff, and they have huge teams building those games. And I think a lot of consumers are sick of buying TCGs. The TCG market imploded. Richard and I both come from the TCG market, and that market imploded down to only a few games for a reason. People are sick of that business model of booster packs and starters and doing it that way.
I have to hope that I'm going to get the thing that I want.
Right.
Yeah.
So an LCG is a much better way of doing it. And you see the Fantasy Flight LCGs, they're doing well commercially. You see Pathfinder, which I would argue is a TCG evolved. It's like an LCG type model. The way Pathfinder is, you buy the box and you buy one pack and it's good for everybody.
Netrunner is another example. Right?
Netrunner,
Let's just define it.
That's an LCG.
Living
card game.
So,
good call.
Yeah.
Or you buy one box for, say, $15-20 and you get all of the new cards. You're not buying pack after pack and chasing it. Yeah. And I think you can do a TCG-style game in that model. But if you're doing like the booster pack model, that's not it.
Number 4.
Avoid designing for the now and design for the future. And what this means is something is hot right now, like 3D chipboard. Things, the chipboard assembles into something, and everybody hops on that bandwagon. Oh, I got a game that does that, and I got a game that does that, because that is what just recently sold very well, and so everybody hops on that, and the market floods with that, and you're lost in the noise. It's not different. The publisher is like, well, I've already heard 5 pitches for this similar kind of thing. Or deck builders. When the deck builders, the new kind of a new mechanic came out, and everybody hopped on that bandwagon. I have another deck builder. Now I'm more interested in a deck builder than I was a few years ago, because now I see less of them. The craze is over, and now when a deck builder comes out, it's really going to be a good deck builder to get me to pay attention to it. So
Legacy
is the hot thing right now. Oh, I gotta have a legacy game, right? That's one of the, I think, 3-dimensional chipboard and legacy are like the hot
Define
it
that
things.
one really quick. Just to make
So
sure
legacy is a persistent game world you play in. So I play this game, and based on what happens in the game, I add stickers to the board, or I open new packs of cards,
something.
I write on things, I tear things up, and that is a permanent change to that game that carries over from game to game. And so I want to think about, what's not hot right now? What hasn't I seen in a long time that's been good, or what might be the wave of the future that hasn't been done yet? And trying to think outside the box for my next game design idea. I worked on a Star Trek game, and we're playing the game, and it was a fun game, but it took too long to play. Our games would often run 2 hours or longer before the game ended. And so we gave that in our playtest feedback, and they were like, we don't understand this at all. When we play here in-house, we play a whole game in like 20 minutes. I'm like, but you guys all live this game every day. And we're playing with new players, Star Trek fans. Hey, want to play the Star Trek game? And we teach them to play, and it takes them like 2 hours to play. We're playing with normal people. Like, oh, we play in like 20 minutes, 45 minutes. We play in our lunch break. We don't understand why it takes you so long to play. We don't think that's a problem. Like, no, you need to... The start of the game was too slow. You need to start at a higher level and would have fixed the problem. And so they blew it off. They didn't take that feedback. Multiple groups, playtest groups, they had remote blind playtesters, told them that, and they didn't listen to it. The game comes out, they start teaching it at cons, and they want to do events and stuff like that, and they time their events with a very narrow time window because they think games are going to take 20, 45 minutes. Games take 2 hours! When new people are, oh my gosh, the game takes much longer to play than we realized. Oops. And so you really do need to listen to that remote blind playtest feedback. Number 6, not doing enough remote blind playtesting. You mail that game to somebody else, and they read the rules and play it. And hopefully, of the people playing your game, only one person knows you as a person, and other people don't know you. So they don't feel emotionally obligated not to criticize you. And then you have your buddy who's running the game, you mail it to, record audio on their smartphone or record video. And I like to have one of the game and one after the game of the discussion of what people thought. And if your game can survive that and people have fun and ask to play it again, then it's getting to the point where it's ready.
And we talked about it last time, the Mega Man game, and I think you had forwarded something, and it was something that maybe
their Kickstarter update.
Yeah, they had said they tested a bunch, like, I guess in-house, and they didn't have a lot of people. They were always there to help, streamline it and make it go quicker, and that's why it took so long, is because we had to figure it out for ourselves, and there wasn't anyone there, and maybe that was one of the problems. They should have sent it out and made sure other people out there could understand it.
So number 7 is related right into that. So is not playing other designers' games. So I think this is a classic mistake I make, is I want to get my game to the table. I want people to play my game. And your game will get better if you play other designers' games more. And so I've run multiple Protospiel events, and this is a mistake I see some designers come. They come to Protospiel, and they try to get their game to the table as much as they can, and over the weekend, I say, hey, so what cool games did you play? And like, oh, I didn't play anybody else's games. Or I played
just sat at my table the entire time.
The whole time.
People,
and you do get lots of good feedback that way, but you will not level up as a game designer or level up your game if you aren't exposed to other game designers. Sitting in on their game and listening to them take criticism, listening to people react to their mechanics. Maybe people were too polite to tell me they hated this mechanic. I go play some other guy's game, he's got the same mechanic, and people are like, but this mechanic's terrible because of this reason, or I don't like it because of this. And I would have missed out on that if I didn't play their game. And seeing them explain why they did things and see some new ideas, it's going to make me a better designer.
Number 8.
Number 8, not doing your homework on a publisher before pitching to that publisher.
We've talked about this before. The idea that you might pitch something that's not their theme or not their style of games.
They don't do abstracts. They don't do things that are not family friendly. Some publishers that specialize in horror games, so they want a horror theme, and your game about growing flowers in your garden is not going to fly.
You've talked about this before. You have a sort of a niche of a social deduction game, and you've had people pitch to you, and you're just like, that's just not what we do,
Yep, all the time. There's a bunch of different reasons why that's not a good thing, but yeah. There's no way I'm going to publish something that isn't what I'm looking for.
Doesn't fit your niche. Yep, absolutely. And so I'm going to give you 2 resources for that. Number 1, Ludology, number 117, that podcast. Mike Fitzgerald goes around BGGCon last year, and he does like a probably 2 to 5 minute interview with different publishers, and he asks, what do you want to hear about in a game? What kind of elevator pitch do you want? The short description of the game? Do you want them to compare it to other games or not? What kind of things are you looking for? What kind of things are you not looking for? This is invaluable intelligence. If you're a game designer and you're going to pitch your game to publishers, you should download that episode and listen to it. It's a great way to study up. Another way to study up is Tom Vassel's A Board Game University podcast, because he interviews a lot of publishers. They each get their own episode, and they talk about how they want to be pitched to and what they want to do. And so I sold the game based on that. I listened to a particular publisher, and he talked about what he wanted and what he didn't want and how to approach him, and I used that when I did pitch him, and he signed that game. Another game signed. I pitched a game. I had picked this publisher I thought was a good fit. They didn't like it, but they did like the game. They said, you know what, this is I pitched a game to AEG, and I want to give credit to John Goody, who's a very nice guy. He's one of the developers for AEG. He goes, this doesn't fit our lineup right now. I don't have a place to put this game, but I like this game. This is a good game. You should go show it to A, B, and C. And I did, and one of them signed the game because it was a good fit for them. And so being able to ask, well, who should I show it to is a good way to do that. But once you got to know your publishers to get to that level.
You can also just go face to face if you can find them at a convention. There's no better way to do that. They now know who you are. They know what you look like. They know they're going to remember you when you follow up with them in some way or see them again.
your booth. I saw that happen to you. Yeah.
And the easiest thing for you to do would be you can send an email to a publisher. If you send me an email, you give me a one-page sell sheet to tell me about your game. I'll look at it, and I'll definitely give it a look. But if you just send me an email that says, "Hey, what are you looking for right now?" That's then when you actually do your pitch, now you know. And it's so easy for me to just be like, just type what I want right now, what I'm looking for. And then you're going to have a much better chance, especially now you can come back to me in a couple months maybe and be like, hey, you still looking for this kind of game? Because I have one and here's a sell sheet. And now it's like, oh, wow, that's cool. You care about what I'm looking for. I'm not just publisher number, 143, who you sent this email to. So that's a good way to do it. I'd recommend that to people.
We're up to number
9.
Number 9, yes.
Not asking themselves about the core emotion and core engagement of their game. So let me clarify what this means. So this is another lesson that I've learned from Kevin Nunn. I've also learned from my day job. For the day job I have is something we think about a lot in a slightly different version way of looking at this. And that's like, what do we want people to feel when they use this product? We're big about the emotion you have when you experience this. And so Kevin Nunn has a great talk on KevinGnunn.com, and it's Nunn with 2 G's, finding and servicing your core engagement. He has an article series there, and he has like a PowerPoint slideshow that's worth looking at. And what it's talking about is, what makes your game fun? And some games, I'd argue, aren't fun, but you like playing them anyways. Some of like the horror games, it's the tension of just trying to stay alive, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed out.
Right.
Is that fun? But people enjoy that experience. That's their core engagement in that game. They're not going to laugh or giggle per se, but that feeling is what engages them. And so for me, I try to ask myself 3 questions, and this is kind of modeled on the philosophy I come from, is what emotion do I want players to feel when they play my game? What do I want them to feel? Is this a humor game? Is this a take that? Is this tension? Is this horror? Is this suspense? What do I want them to feel?
Do you want them in conflict with their opponents? Do you want them to be working with their opponents?
Yep. What's the primary decision players make in your game? Brian talked about, does it have a meaningful decision? It's an interesting decision. What is the number one decision in your game? The most important decision in the game that you're going to do. And so I think, like in Booze Barons, it's like, am I going to go get the easy point and take a card, or am I going to try to expose this guy for more points? That's like the most important decision in the game. Am I going to do the easy one or the riskier one? What am I going to do? And nothing else in your game matters but that core decision. You can jettison every other mechanic, you can throw it all away, you can revamp it, you can redo it. Like the movement system I threw out and redid it for Boost Barons because it didn't matter the core decision. It wasn't part of the core decision. I don't need it. What's the one decision for worker placement? Where am I going to put my guy in terms of these 2 engines I'm trying to build? What's the one core decision people make? Focus on that. And then what's the most important mechanic in your game? What's the cool mechanic in your game? You may have several cool mechanics in your game, but if I told you could only keep one, you had to build a game around that, which one would you keep? That's the one mechanic you're going to build your game around, and you can jettison the others. If you need to simplify the game or cut it down, that one core mechanic is what you want to enhance.
My design partner Clayton, he will often try to, when we have a design that we're iterating through, he'll try to think of the one. It's not a core idea or decision necessarily, but it's a phrase we want people to use in a game. Or a question that we want them to ask.
You're a witch!
Exactly. That in New Salem, you're a witch was the phrase we were going after. That was our core feeling that we
That's
were
your core
building.
emotion.
Yep, and that's what we're building the whole game around.
All right, let's talk about number 10 then. What's your number 10?
Adding instead of cutting.
Okay.
So you're testing your prototype game and something isn't working. And this is a classic game designer trap. Now, I've been guilty of this too. I've been guilty of a lot of things on this list. So don't say, oh, I'm better than this. I learned a lot of these the hard way. That's why I'm saying them. Yep. So it's adding instead of cutting. So something isn't working in your game, And what I need to do is I need to add an auction phase that will then mitigate the unequal powers of these cards. So people can bid from the auction phase, then that'll take away, that'll solve the uneven power thing. So some people will pay more, and some people pay less. And people, they take their game and they add to it and they add to it, and it gets more mechanics and more things, and it spirals in complexity. And I think that's a classic mistake.
The more variables you have in an equation, the more it can get unbalanced fairly easily. Well, thank you guys for joining us this week. I've been your host, Richard Noon. I'm here as always with Brian Hink and Jeremy Commander. I'll see you across the table someday.
Hey, this is Richard to remind you that you can check out our website at boardgame.business. Old episodes are indexed by subject to make finding an answer to your question easier. You can find links to our BGG Guild, other networking sites, and, if you feel like supporting us, our Patreon account. Donations are used for equipment to improve the presentation of our podcast. Thanks for watching or listening.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.